Is inflation a bad thing? The obvious answer here would be yes. Inflation, quite literally, is defined as an increase in the price of goods and services in an economy. That is, they've been inflated. On the ground level, when you have to pay more for the same groceries you've been buying for the past several months, it's easier to see how inflation is the enemy. However, when economists track inflation values and what they do for the economy, they consider it a victory. How can two things coexist at the same time? They have, and they will for a long time. Inflation isn't the enemy, even if it's not exactly something people look forward to. It's still, however, a necessity per the United States Federal Reserve. Now, is inflation the only way out? Is there a middle ground that might make things easier on the average American? And what is it with the number 2? Are you familiar with the snowball effect? That's when a snowball gets bigger and bigger as it rolls down a mountainside. The snowball started off the size of your fist, but by the time it collides, it's enough to wipe out an entire village. As the snowball goes down, it collects more and more snow as well as momentum. It's now more powerful and more dangerous. The United States debt dilemma can be explained in much of the same terms. The U.S. has never been debt-free. In fact, in 1922, the debt was at approximately $408 billion. How did the country accumulate a massive debt a century ago? Essentially, all governments incur debt to act as a shock absorber for the economy. Government debt created to cover costs from major shock events can be particularly beneficial. Such events would include a major war, like World War II, a public health emergency, like the COVID-19 pandemic, or a severe economic downturn, as with the Great Recession. In the absence of debt financing, when revenues decline during a downturn, a government would need to raise taxes or reduce spending, which would exacerbate the negative event. Like, say, a credit card. A person makes a certain purchase using a credit card to cover the entire amount for something at that moment, and then gradually pays that amount back to the bank. They still would have to pay that amount back in full, meaning they have time. However, the number goes up with time because of interest rates. If the cost of purchases exceeds the amount that's paid off, we have a deficit in overall debt. Back in 1922, the snowball was considerable in size, $422 billion worth. From then on until 1998, the U.S. government paid back some of the money that it owed. However, it also borrowed some more. The snowball never stopped rolling down the side of the mountain. It's now 1998, and it's grown bigger, $10 trillion worth. That's over 20 times the size of the snowball 80 years prior. A state of emergency was called, and the government planned on bringing their debt down, hopefully to zero. To pay back the debt, they had to increase taxes, raise inflation levels, and override the economy. By 2022, however, the debt hadn't been cleared. The U.S. had borrowed more. Now, a century on, debt has reached an astronomical sum, $30 trillion. Is it even possible to pay back that amount? Yes, it is. However, it'll take a long time. Almost as long of a time as it did to incur that amount. That being said, economists have devised strategies that could help the United States curb its debt dilemma. For the average person, on the other hand, that means inflation. Did you know that Argentina led the world with the highest inflation rates in 2024? By February 2024, the inflation rate had gone up to 276%. That's compared to the rate of 254% in January of that same year. The inflation rate has stood at a constant rate of 189% from 1944 to 2024. The lowest ever recorded was negative 7% in 1954, and the highest was 20,262% in 1990. Of course, these numbers sound ironically inflated. People refuse to believe that inflation could ever be that bad. But the numbers are real, and they reflect a fact. Inflation is seen as a necessity to save the economy. The obvious follow-up question here would be, how can an economy survive in no indefinite terms when inflation reaches triple digits? We're starting with Argentina as an example, before working our way into the United States, where the conditions aren't nearly as bad. Frankly, they're improving in Argentina as well. When President Javier Milei took over, he introduced austerity measures to combat Argentina's economic crisis. Of several things, the real estate market was deregulated, subsidies were slashed, and energy bills nearly tripled. Surely, this could not be a good sign, right? Well, you'd be surprised to know that this was exactly what the government had intended to do. And based on the reports coming in since Milei introduced these measures, they're bound to continue. With inflation, That too, in a particular economy such as Argentina, it gets worse before it gets better. That's how inflation should be viewed as well. By raising prices of just about everything, Milei's government forced the common Argentinian citizens to spend money. They had no other choice. Prices rose at a rate of 8.8% in April 2024, the Argentine government statistics agency reported, down from a monthly rate of 11% in March of the same year, and well below a peak of 25% from December 2023, when Milei became president. The president considers it a win, and he's half right. The numbers are favorable. The people consider it a loss, and they're half right too. It's become increasingly difficult for people to sustain themselves when all their money goes into buying the bare essentials. Inflation cannot satisfy everyone, as it was never meant to. In fact, the main goal of inflating the prices of goods and services was to force people to spend more money. That's usually a driver for the economy. More money is being spent in every sector, more money is being used, and the end result is stability. As mentioned before, it's worse before it gets better, and the people of Argentina are witnessing the worst of it right now. And now, let's go to the United States, where the economy is doing considerably better than that in Argentina. Despite this, economists believe that a certain degree of inflation is necessary to keep things moving. By things, they mean the economy. As of June 2024, U.S. economists have two main goals: bringing inflation down to pre-pandemic levels and clear the national debt. During the height of the pandemic, the United States recorded the largest inflation rate it had seen since 1980, at a rate of 9.1%. To put this into context, in June 2024, during more favorable times, the inflation rate had gone down to 3%. That's almost compared to 3.3% in May of that same year. The numbers show that American citizens do have to pay more for goods and services at a steady rate, but that the numbers aren't as abysmal. According to economists, the ideal inflation rate would be 2%. Now, the question is, if the U.S. economy isn't in a state such as the Argentinian economy, why is the target 2% when it could be 0%? To many, it would seem like the ultimate goal for any economy would be for inflation to go down. In other words, deflate. However, deflation has a different meaning when it comes to economics, and similar to inflation, it's also a double-edged sword. Do prices of goods and services go down during deflation periods? Yes, by virtue of the word, prices deflate. However, that's not really something to aim for. And this is the part where we introduce another term common in economics: recession. Inflation, deflation, and recession are all interlinked. Deflation is not simply defined as the prices going down. It's defined as a sustained decline, whereby consumers and businesses tend to delay purchases and investments, expecting it to go down further. This has been defined as a paradox of thrift. That is, because you can see a trend in decreased purchases, the prices will go down even further to encourage people to buy more goods. Again, a sustained decline. This decreased demand can reduce overall economic activity, leading to lower production, layoffs, and higher unemployment. As companies earn less, they might cut wages or jobs, further reducing consumer spending power. This can lead to a downward spiral where lower spending leads to further declines in prices, deepening the economic slump. You see, while inflation gets a bad rap, not all inflation is bad. There's such a thing known as wage push inflation, whereby because of an improving economy, wages go higher. Now, since people are earning more, they're likely to spend more too. This is just one of the many types of inflation. Understandably, not all of them are as favorable. On that note, neither is deflation. Yes, prices go down, but ironically, at what cost? Deflation also increases the real value of debt. As prices and incomes fall, the relative burden of repaying fixed debts grows heavier for consumers and businesses. This can lead to higher default rates, putting stress on banks and financial institutions, which may then become more reluctant to lend, further constricting economic activity. The reduced availability of credit can stifle business expansions and consumer spending, exacerbating the downturn. During a recession, economic output and employment are already declining, and deflation can intensify these declines by discouraging spending and investment. The fear of deflation can also limit the effectiveness of monetary policy. For instance, when interest rates are near zero, the central bank has limited ability to stimulate the economy through traditional means, as nominal interest rates cannot be reduced below zero. This situation, known as a liquidity trap, can make it difficult to escape a recession, prolonging the economic pain. Deflation is a decline in economic activity, and a sustained decline that lasts over a period of 2 months categorized as a recession. It's all interlinked. With that in mind, let's talk about why the number 2 is so deeply revered by economists in the United States. For one, it's not just in the US, it's in the whole world. Every country aims to reach a steady rate of inflation at the rate of 2% every year, never zero. Since 1996, Fed policymakers have generally adopted the stance that their target for doing so was an inflation rate of around 2%. In January 2012, then-Chairman Ben Bernanke made this target official, and both of his successors, including current Chair Jerome Powell, have made clear that the Fed sees 2% as the appropriate desired rate of inflation. Interest has been lower than 2%. In 2020, when inflation was barely 1%, Jerome Powell declared a state of emergency. But why 2%? To be quite honest, not many people know where that number originated. However, several trace back its origins to a New Zealand finance minister who made a casual remark about 2 being the magic number back in the 80s. Since then, 2% has unanimously become the ideal inflation rate. However, the number isn't specific, and it doesn't have to be 2%. It's only when an economy is doing well enough that 2% can be standardized. Going back to Argentina, where the economy is in a downturn, 2% can't sustain it, much less save it. The main thing is that the Federal Reserve guides the economy towards an inflation rate high enough to allow it room to lower interest rates if needed to stimulate the economy, but low enough that it doesn't seriously erode consumer purchasing power. That would be 2%. Now, will the United States be able to achieve its economic goals by 2025?